This episode is proudly supported by Anchor Food Professionals, makers of mainland cheese. Here's Andy Sy from the Notting Hill Hotel.
We've been using them for a few years now, using their tasty and mozzarella cheese. We go through about 135 kilos a week at the moment. So a huge number. So we use it for our garlic bread, our pizzas, our parmas, our bechamel, our cheese sauce for our croquettes and arancini, throughout our lasagnas, anywhere we can really. It's such a good product. You know, having the freshest chips to your fresh chicken to a freshly crumbed schnitzel and topping up with a really high quality cheese is amazing.
For more information, go to anchorfoodprofessionals.com.
Having bakeries that have kind of rye bread on their menu is it's not my personal victory, but I think it's very meaningful and very impactful, and reminding people that it is still important to have that rye bread on their shelf, even if they sometimes think that, well, it doesn't sell that well, why should I have that?
Hi everyone, it's Dani Valent and this is Dirty Linen. Dirty Linen is on the road. We love getting out, about and amongst it. And today we are coming to you from Grainz. That is Grainz, Grainz with a Z, and it is a semi-annual gathering of people who work with grain that might be growing it or milling it or turning it into beautiful baked products. And it is certainly, in my case anyway, a celebration of people that eat grain, or a celebration for people that eat grain in all its many and wonderful forms. It's been a really thrilling and engaging day of conversations. We were welcomed by the traditional owners of this land in a very moving and a tone-setting smoking ceremony, which was really beautiful. We're in the Grampians region, so Garraward, 3.5 hours west of Melbourne, and we're sitting right now in the community centre at Pomonal, which is a really special town that's been impacted twice in the last couple of years by bushfires. So the theme of this Grainz is resilience, and many of the speakers have tapped into that theme in their presentations. The person who kicked us off with the first keynote was Valli. Laura is a researcher, an academic. She has a PhD in rye research. So she's a rye searcher. So I'll say her very nice pun for her. Laura is originally from Estonia, and it's been a real pleasure to connect with you today, Laura. Welcome to Dirty Linen.
Likewise, thanks so much for being here.
Really fantastic to meet you in Pomonal, who, you know, life just takes us on interesting journeys, and you probably didn't think that you'd be in a podcast studio, ad hoc as it is in Pomonal, when you were a little girl in Estonia.
It's pretty incredible, and I would have never thought that I moved to the States to research rye.
Yeah. Well, tell us a little bit about yourself and how you did come to be a rye searcher.
As it is with many things in life, you notice the red thread after the fact, that when the events have happened, right? But I think I've always been into food, as we all are. I suppose it's a funny thing to say. I think we need to eat on a daily basis. But this basic need is such an incredible way of connecting both with the people and also with the environment around you, and to think about interspecies relationship and your identity creation and maintenance. So I did my undergrad degree at Cambridge in the UK. Social anthropology was my focus there, and I was just so curious about the motivations that people have to cook, because it's a demand that you have on a daily basis, but then also a potential enjoyment that you can turn this demand into something more. And so as an undergrad, I wrote about power relationships in home cooking, and I used various concepts developed by the French philosopher Michel Foucault, and how governmentality also comes into play. So how our desires are informed and formed by those in power very often, and how we can take that power back, but then also how it gets really complicated complicated in the domestic sphere when somebody needs to cook, but then the eaters have their likes and dislikes, and then whose likes and dislikes are prioritized. But at the time, it was in 2015, I still felt that food wasn't taken that seriously in academia. It was more like a retirement project for those academics who had done more important stuff during their careers. And also I felt that I'd done so much theory work and a lot of reading and writing, but I wanted to do something practical because that's what food is all about, right? It's actually feeding yourself and feeding others. And so I moved back to Estonia, where I'm from. And it just so happened that I got looped into the opening of a fabulous coffee roastery and cafe. I did some work with them with regards to the menu development, did a lot of local sourcing, organic, all those buzzwords. But then after a few years, felt the pull back to academia, and just again, it's a longer story, but somehow ended up getting the opportunity to do a PhD at the Bread Lab in Washington State. So I lived an hour north of Seattle, moved there without ever having visited the US, kind of a leap of faith, and thought I would start researching wheat sourdough, because clearly that's what you do at the Bread Lab. But I think they were looking for something that would bring this interdisciplinarity more into focus, and do something that's out of the ordinary, because Washington State University is a land-grant university, so kind of in the service of the needs of the local agriculture. And in the US, a lot of agriculture, of course, is large-scale and more commodity-based. We were working off the commodity market, working with small-scale growers and thinking about diversified grain economies. Resiliency, of course, is central to that, and food sovereignty and flavor and nutrition and community building and all those beautiful things. And I looked at all of those topics through the lens of rye. So when I talk about, or when I mention that I'm a rye researcher, then people just think, oh, this is so niche and so specific, right? But when you think what it entails, then it's pretty much everything. And so I just take rye as a case study to think about power relations and heteronormativity and being somewhere in the margins and this perseverance and a lot of those issues that I brought up during the keynote today as well. What I really enjoyed about my time at the lab was that it was an excellent balance between theory and practice, and being able to do field trials, be on a combine, mill the grain that we're growing, bake bread from it, give it away in the local community and connect to a lot of people. And I feel that there's this wonderful web of people across the globe. The anthropologist researcher Anna Tsing uses mushrooms as an example to think about those communities that spring up. And I feel that grain economies, or like small-scale grain communities, are a bit like that. And they're very focused on the region where they are, but they also really branch out from that, and hence the global connections. So it might seem far-fetched that I'm in Australia after having done my PhD in the US, but those connections were there before me. And I got to know these people first via online methods, but now it's just so wonderful to meet everybody in person and see the surroundings and be physically present and share the flavors and the smells and all of that.
Yeah, well, goodness me, what a great answer. You've brought up so many things and I now have 1,000 questions. Stephen Jones, who runs the Bread Lab in the US, I first encountered him at Grainz some years ago, I think it was 2017 maybe, and got a sense of the extraordinary work that he does in connecting people who are interested in local grain economies all around the world. What do you think distinguishes these communities? Like, what is a grain nerd like?
They are such mission-driven, passionate people. Persistence is key. They very often have done something different in their life before. They're oftentimes, many of them have academic backgrounds or they have had some very specific careers. But then I think they've made this switch in search of some real connection and like some tangibility to the daily work that they do. And there's this element of care, I think, that also is the common denominator for all those communities, that they, as we heard Nick from Grainz speak earlier today, they continuously think how to best serve their immediate community. It's this really real question of providing people with food that they can access and that they like to eat. And this being in service of other people, I think, and being curious, seeing the connections, having the imagination to think differently, and to feel that if you see that something doesn't really work, such as commodity-based agricultural system, or recognizing that it's harmful to the environment, they choose to do it differently rather than just criticizing. So like building an alternative system and living it. And I've found the community has been almost the best part of the PhD, I think, like just being able to witness that as a bit of a bystander. Sometimes I think, what is the role of researchers? And I think anthropologists in particular have really taken it to heart, because we go out and we spend time with communities, and then the question is, well, what do we give back to them, right? So we go and study them, but what's the broader purpose? And so I feel constantly indebted to all those people who have shared the time and space with me, and have taken the time out of their busy schedules to think about connectedness and grains and flavor and all the great things.
Well, as you said in your presentation, you've been studying rye for 7 years, but you might be talking to a rye farmer who's been doing it for 50 or generationally. So there is so much wisdom to tap into. You know, I'm interested in, you said earlier that food is not taken that seriously as a field of study in academia. And I think it's not taken that seriously in many sectors of society. You know, we have in Australia Minister for Sport, ministers for Arts and Tourism, but no ministers for food. Mm-hmm. Food, of course, is fundamental. But I think also thinking about your first thesis about power in food, as you sort of alluded to the fact that there are gendered roles that have traditionally been played in food, and of course, gender is bound up in power. You mentioned about governmentality, not a word that I even know, but I sort of think I get what it means. Yeah. So power structures and the way that politics operates through food. I mean, it's obvious that food is fundamental. Why don't you think why has it been sidelined as a field of study and as an arena of power?
Once you yourself are so immersed in something, it's kind of hard to understand that not everybody might not be as passionate about it, right? And I try to be very self-conscious of it when I'm doing my research or when I'm speaking to people who just focus on food. And it's kind of on a side note, but I feel that the idea of educating the consumer comes up a lot. Or I've been speaking here with people who have recently hosted some farm-to-table dinners, and this idea of we want to tell the story and we want to speak about the ingredients and the ways of preparing the food. And so there's a lot of things that the people who are in the food world are extremely passionate about, but I don't always know if it resonates with a lot of other people. I do think it does with some, but then also in life we have so many things that demand our attention and that we can become passionate about, and in a way food is one of the many. And so there is this fundamental difference, I think, between the people who view food as something that gives them the capacity to do everything else in their life versus the people who think that food is the fundamental thing to focus on because it connects to so many other things in your life. So it's a kind of like, how do we position food in the realm of bigger questions? And I would say food is never irrelevant to any government. I do think that on a policy level, there is a lot of food-related decisions that are being made, but maybe it's not perceived as interesting to the broader audience, or it's hard to tell why exactly it is that it doesn't get that much I mean, we talk about food, I think, when a crisis looms or with regards to climate change or, bushfires happening, how do we still feed our populations? Or in the US at the moment with the SNAP benefits, many people potentially losing access to food. Like when we recognize the importance of feeding our communities, but also there's just so many approaches to how this could be done. And there are times when I also think maybe there's just many people who are overly obsessed with food. I have a background in disordered eating, amongst other things. So there's like just obsession with either not eating enough or eating too much, and how it impacts your physical being and your emotional well-being and all that. So it's hard sometimes to get the balance just right. You're either absolutely obsessed with it, but like how do we just make good food accessible for people so that they wouldn't need to worry about it too much, or that it wouldn't become all consuming, that you only like think and live for food.
Oh yeah, so interesting. And again, you've brought up so many big questions. I suppose a lot of capitalism tries to make food frictionless, and it's just always available. Anything's always available whenever you want it, right to your doorstep. So I think there's perhaps you're trying to not have people think too deeply about the supply chains and what food arrives in the brown paper bag. I've thought a lot about values recently in that regard, and I think it's the starting question is, what are the values that guide our action? So with regards to small scale food systems, the values are connectedness and community and sustainability and all those. When we go bigger, the values could be efficiency, reduced manual labor, right? And it's hard to say what the right or wrong is. Like when I hear the bakers here talk about how arduous their job is, and I recently sat down for a dinner with a baker who, at the age of 40 something, is just completely physically done. And it's really sad to hear that, right? So it does take a toll on our bodies. Farming is very difficult. Milling is a challenge, and industrialized food system has given us the opportunity to move away from those very challenging physical tasks, and yet there's a pull in that as well. And we want to be connected to the entire food making process, but I don't think it has to be for everybody. And if we're advocating for those smaller scale grain economies or food production systems, we need to ascertain that there's enough people involved in those food production systems, right? And I think that for a long time we've evaluated the success of the society almost based on how few people are engaged in food production. So the kind of the definition of a developed nation is that it's just a couple percentages of the overall population that engages in food production. And those very stereotypical stories of second generation immigrants just like doing something that doesn't necessitate manual labor. And I think it's really interesting that we're going back to actually like being involved in food production in a very embodied fashion. Because for a while, I think we also were thinking that, the next thing is just some protein shakes and just like doing the math of what we need and having ways of optimizing your nutritional intake. But, there is so much more to food than just the nutrients and the calories that you get from it. Yeah, and I suppose the fewer people working in primary production, the more disconnection there is from food systems, what grows where and when. And as you say, there is a hunger to get back to that, to be more engaged with it. But yeah, that brings with it its own challenges for these people, these very hardworking bakers who are so in the detail of every day's bake. It's so humbling, actually. And I don't want to be a baker, but I want to support those bakers by eating their bread, definitely. Yeah. It's a complex picture. Laura, I'd love to know more about you and rye and Estonia. Tell us about rye in your home country.
I think it's really important for all of us, speaking for 1.3 million people at the moment. But it's a flavor that you carry with you, and it speaks of home. First time I moved away from Estonia was to the UK, which isn't all that far at all. But the food item that I missed the most was definitely rye bread. And just the Estonian rye bread that you tasted today as well. I'm so longing for that, and equating that with a taste of home. And during the years when I wasn't eating that much, then rye bread was actually one of the things that felt safe to me. So it was like a source of comfort. So it went way beyond just like satisfying certain cravings, but there was like so much depth to it. And growing up in Estonia, you inevitably pass grain fields all the time. It's such a small country. Doesn't take long to drive from one end of the country to the other. And my grandmother considered it important to inform me about what wheat looks like and what rye looks like, and so all the different grains. And like language or vocabulary wise, we differentiate between breads made from different grains. So I think there's a bit of an awareness of where like bread comes from. Speaking or talking about industrialized agricultural systems, again, the detachment is often brought up, and people not even or often like recognizing that flour comes from a plant, right, or that it's a grass. But I think that we probably have that connection, and like in school canteens, or at least when I went to school, you'd have rye bread accompany the lunch together with white bread, but both are available, and it's eaten regularly. It's abundantly available in grocery stores at a reasonable price, and it's beautiful in the fields. We're very proud of one of the kind of an old variety. It's called Sangaste, developed around 1875 by a German count that was residing in the country. It's very tall, up to 2 meters, big golden kernels. So lots of cultural legacy, I think, that comes with the grain. We have this material culture of how bread was made and how integral it was to the daily operations of a farm, and how it was the primary source of calories, and then turning it into vodka at times, and all those different things that you can make with and from grains. But then it is a bit industrialized in Estonia as well. I mean, as much as it can be in a relatively small country. But the bulk of bread definitely comes from bigger producers, like bread factories, and a lot of the flour comes from roller mills as well, so on a larger scale. So when I went back to Estonia a couple of years ago to spend some time at a roller mill there, then the board there was a bit dismissive about this entire small-scale agriculture. Like, oh, yeah, they can do it for fun, but, we are actually the calorie providers. And you definitely get that sentiment quite a bit in everything that is happening, like, at events like these. Like, yeah, it's a hobby or it's a fun thing, but it would never feed us all, right? And, when you look at the percentages, it is true. Artisanal baking still covers a very small fraction of the need for grains, of the need for bread, of the need for calories. But I don't think that here we can equate the meaningfulness of something with the presence of it percentage wise. And it helps to think on a community level, I believe.
Yeah. Tell me some of the sayings in Estonian around rye bread.
One that I was definitely brought up with is that leib, which is the Estonian word for rye bread, that leib is sacred. And, when a piece of bread falls on the floor, you take it up and you kiss it. So that's kind of a beautiful, resonates with the 3-second rule, I suppose, that you need to quickly reach for it. But this kind of knowing that it has sustained us as a nation for centuries, and having that kind of, we honor it, and we're proud that you can't really find rye bread in that many places. I think it's this interesting small nation thing, maybe, that you want to keep what you have. So not everybody needs to like it, but it's just such a uniquely us thing. Austa leiba, leib on vanam kui meie is a common proverb in Estonia, so it means honor the bread because bread is older than we are. And yeah, this kind of it being the cornerstone for many things. as I mentioned during the workshop earlier, instead of, or the equivalent of bon appetit in Estonia, though we have the exact same wording in Estonia as well, so head isu, but an older version of it is jätku leiba, which means may there be rye bread. So this kind of wish for continuous, not abundance, but just like having sufficient resources to feed oneself, right? Not too much, but not too little either. And yeah, well, I love reading about how grain was harvested back in the day, how it was stored. There are some records of like the smoky rye. We have like the summer time when rye is harvested in Estonia can be a bit wet sometimes. So you don't get the moisture level in the grain to the point where it needs to be for long-term storage. And when it's harvested before that, then it needs to be dried after harvest. And apparently back in the day, they would dry the grain in the farmhouses. But at some point in history, the farmhouses didn't have chimneys. So they were pretty smoky there. I mean, you'd have some ventilation happening, but there's this lingering smoke. And the rye was essentially smoked, and it helped it to keep for a longer time. No fungal issues. It wouldn't get moldy. But it probably also brought a very distinct flavor to the bread. So just interesting to think about how rye grain has changed over the course of centuries. I mean, Estonia these days does use more industrialized methods as well in grain growing. And you have growth regulators that are being applied to rye to make it shorter and more convenient to harvest. So as I tried to emphasize earlier, it's not that rye is just only suited for small-scale grain economies. It can be incorporated into industrialized systems as well. But it's been really interesting to study rye in a context where it is so marginal, and then to think back at where I'm coming from and what it means to us as Estonians. And like, I think if I had written my PhD in Estonia, it would carry a completely different narrative because the context would have been so different. But it has definitely, it has brought me closer to being an Estonian, but it has completely also expanded the notion, I think, and made me look at rye very differently as well. So to move completely beyond that, like slightly nationalistic narrative, maybe, or it's a resource for us all.
Well, I thought it was so fascinating to think of you as an anthropologist who is studying a grain, and some of the ways that you spoke about rye was as though it was this population with its own cheeky character, a little, I think you called it rowdy at one point. Can you talk about that sort of anthropological approach to looking at a plant food?
Yeah, I mean, it's, I suppose, a bit of a trendy thing maybe in anthropology at the moment to think about interspecies relationships, because anthropology as a discipline initially it was known as studying specific populations and then understanding the dynamics within it and the structures and essentially how people live on a daily basis. Then anthropology moved into studying specific topics in specific communities, this kind of tendency of specialization. And now we are going beyond humans in many instances because it's kind of inevitable. When you're thinking humans, you also need to think about how the way we live impacts everybody else with whom we share this planet. And so there's some really interesting research that has definitely impacted my own ideas around looking at something that doesn't really talk to you. And I mean, the thing with plants is that they are further from humans in a perception way than animals. So we relate to them less in a way. But I also want to avoid just anthropomorphizing rye. But it's kind of a fun exercise. And I mean, I do think it's real. And, from popular literature, Michael Pollan's work on the botany of desire and how different plant species not enforce, but then they draw us to do certain things. Or, this argument that maybe it isn't humans who domesticated wheat, but perhaps wheat kind of domesticated humans, because wheat is like so widespread across the globe. But rye has definitely been very inspirational to me as a crop. This kind of, its quiet presence throughout millennia, being there as a supportive act in many cases, not that often the main show. But offering sustenance, its deep root system, this idea of being grounded in a place, but also kind of swaying and having that flexibility, the cross-pollinating nature of it. I think this exchange of ideas is really important. And particularly these days when there's a lot of everything seems to be changing or everything seems to be unknown, and then we're looking for some sort of comfort and stability, and then that is manifested as a complete reluctance to change. But I think rye teaches us how to evolve gracefully over time and morph without losing your true essence, but still incorporating traits from elsewhere. And that's why thinking about rye culture is kind of intriguing to me as well, to think what it is that we can create from that substance that is rye, how we can use it and how we can come up with something different, without any cultural appropriation or without dismissing the traditional ways of working with rye. But it's also a material that we can rethink and use in novel applications. It doesn't really belong to anybody. And I mean, it has connections to communities. And sometimes I think, maybe I was kind of offered this opportunity to work on rye because of my Estonian heritage, but I don't claim to have any more ownership over rye than anybody else would, even though I was brought up around it. If anything, it gives me a slightly different insight into rye, but I don't think I can say that I'm any closer to knowing what rye is. I might have some ideas, but it's all about exposure and intentional engagement.
Yeah, well, I suppose you do have this sense that rye can be an inside food as well as an outsider. So, yeah, but you said you're not finished with rye. You want to keep studying it. I mean, where is there to go?
That's something I'm thinking about at the moment a lot. And it's this, a lot of people who do PhDs, they get very tired of the work at the end of it because, you need to write something up and you go over the manuscript again and again and again, and it never seems to be quite where you want it to be. And you reach a level of being fatigued. And the running social media joke is that, you complete a PhD and then you go and open a bakery. I'm like, well, I don't even have that because I know how hard opening a bakery is. So that doesn't really seem to have the appeal to me. And so I suffered from that as well. Or when I was done with my PhD, I thought, okay, this is it. I won't do any work on rye anymore. And for a couple of reasons. One was that I didn't want to be associated with only one topic. I don't want to always be talking about rye. And I wanted to branch out and maybe pick another species or pick another food-related issue. And then I also felt that sometimes my interest in rye and my ability to talk about rye in basically any context was mistaken for me being a spokesperson for rye or an activist of sorts. I don't think that I need to convince people of how good rye is. Rye might not be good for all people and not for all contexts, and it definitely isn't going to save the world from climate change or whatever else is happening that we're trying to avoid. And so I just thought I'd leave it and move on to something else. But then after a while, I realized that, I really liked what I was doing. And it's something that I've gained a fair amount of knowledge about. And again, it's this beautiful connecting force. And it sparks interest in people at the moment. And I don't know what the next thing exactly is. Or what these connections and the knowledge that I have might lend itself to. It might be interesting to go and have a deep dive into the current rye situation in Estonia. Maybe there is some more global work to be done. I'm not quite sure. I'm leaving it open at the moment.
What can you imagine people walking away from Grainz doing next, or how might it change their thinking, not just from your presentations, but just from the kind of conversations that people are having in this context?
I think, well, it's probably impacted by this year's theme, which is resilience. But again, how to deal with change and like how to deal with all the strains and stressors that people are experiencing at the moment. The business side, how to make things financially viable, how to cope with the constantly changing environmental conditions, how to find enough people who would support what you're doing in terms of there being a customer base. So those very like daily existential questions, I think, that you run into when you are running a business. But then also, I think that this group in particular, a lot of small scale grain people, they're always looking ahead and thinking what's next or what is the new thing that we could be working on, either in terms of some new approaches or new grains that they might incorporate into their production system. So this kind of exchange of ideas, I think, what is happening here, the cross-pollination, people coming with some questions and thoughts, but sometimes you just don't even know what it lends itself to, right? But getting away from like your workspace, I think, is a good thing. Taking a few days to be away from the production, and then to be inspired by like people who are like-minded, but also I feel that they're all quite different. I spent some time with a few bakers in Melbourne, and the common sentiment there was that, we're all crazy, but just crazy in our own ways. So it is different kinds of crazies coming together in the best possible way, and just seeing what is next. And again, kind of the tagline or the guiding principle of my PhD supervisor, Dr. Stephen Jones, was that like we don't need to grow in scale, but we're proposing a replicable model, and I think that is what is happening. And so the question becomes like, do we want to like spread? Do we want to encourage and facilitate the creation of other small-scale grain economies across Australia or beyond that? Do we want to do something about the larger scale food systems? I've thought about that a lot with regards to rye. Like, this. Where would my expertise be more useful? Like, is it working with big food producers and trying to get more rye into their products? Because that's where the volume is. But then in terms of like impacting people's lives, I think that small scale work is pretty significant as well. Even in Pomona, right? This one bakery has such presence in the community. Like, the first day here, we visited the general store here, a coffee shop, a brewery, and an art gallery, and all of them had baked goods from Blue Wren, right? And it's incredible. This is just a couple doing that, and so that's very real and tangible change. And I think it's like fueling people and keeping them going and seeing that the work that they do matters.
Yeah, I think so often things that are small and tied closely to a particular community can really be underestimated in the impact that they have. And
big time. And with rye too, as I said, when we're talking about its global presence, it's like less than a percentage probably. But what do those numbers mean? We're thinking a lot on a global scale, and there's some value in that. And, we've come to view ecosystems as absolutely interlinked. And it's this one planet that we're dealing with. But then those numbers don't really matter at all when you think about local communities, right? We all have our own unique challenges and opportunities. And having a bakery that serves a local community is huge. And for me, having bakeries that have kind of rye bread on their menu is it's not my personal victory, but it's just, I think it's very meaningful and very impactful, and reminding people that it is still important to have that rye bread on their shelf, even if they sometimes think that, well, it doesn't sell that well, why should I have that?
You really got me thinking about rye bread. I live near Zelda, so that's
their rye bread is amazing.
Represented here today, and I love the 100% rye tin loaf. And some of the things you were saying about the characteristics of rye, I hadn't really thought about consciously before, but they were so relevant, and it really made me appreciate that loaf that I love in a different way. So you talked about how it keeps so well, just the way that the moisture operates within the bread. And yeah, just even looking at the shapes of your loaves with the, what's it called? Flying roof, where the top of the bread, rises and leaves a gap underneath. Not that that bread doesn't have it. So it just made me appreciate the beautiful structure of that bread in a different way. And I guess all the context you put around rye, through history and through different cultures and the way it's perceived, it's going to make every slice of Vegemite toast much more significant.
Which I still haven't tried yet. Somebody told me that rye bread, butter and Vegemite is the way to go.
It is the best, and it's got to be toasted really dark. As each day goes by, you don't have to toast it for quite as long, but, it's still got that beautiful moisture, and it's delicious. Laura, you've been here for a while. We've got to get the Vegemite into you. But we'll let you go because you've been talking all day, and I'm so grateful to you for being such an amazing speaker on the podcast as well.
My pleasure.
But just give us a rye, something that we should try rye bread with. Like how would we eat it? Perhaps people are listening to this and they're not into rye yet. What's the gateway?
I think my personal forever favorite is like fresh rye bread, not sized super thin. I like it slightly thicker. Generous slathering of cultured butter or just good butter that you like. Sprinkle of sea salt flakes and a drizzle of honey. That's my favorite, but plenty of other ways. And just maybe like having your favorite sandwich combination, but trying it on rye and seeing how it tastes and how, I think life is too short for not having flavor in your food. And rye brings a lot of flavor. So just having fun with it and playing around with it. Plenty of opportunities there.
Wow. Okay. Well, Laura, thank you so much for sharing with us today. Rye searcher extraordinaire.
Thanks so much for having me. Such a pleasure.
I'll find some Vegemite. But yeah, thanks for being on Dirty Linen.
Thank you.
This is Dirty Linen, and I'm Dani Valent. We air the issues that the hospitality industry finds hard to talk about, hearing from different people with unique perspectives. We want to hear from you as well. If you have something that needs to be said about a topic, get in touch so we can include your perspective. Contact us at dirtylinen@deepintheweeds.com.au or hit us up on Insta at Dirty Linen Podcast. We can't wait to hear from you.
This is a Deep in the Weeds production.